Serious, have you ever had a close friend become a murderer? How did you deal with it? I had a drinking/party buddy I made right after I got out of the Navy. I'll call him Bob. Met him at work. He seemed a good guy. I got pretty close with him and his brothers. We would go fishing and generally drank and partied a lot. One time he hit his girlfriend in front of me in a gas station parking lot. We all had been drinking and I got up in his face and pulled him away. He was angry and told me it was not my business, and during our arguing his girlfriend got in her car and left. I met my wife while he and I were still close. Bob would bust my chops about having gone mad due to hanging with my girlfriend all of the time. He said I was bussy whipped, etc. It was always in a joking manner. I had not seen him in a few months and I ran into his older brother, Rufus. I asked how Bob was, and Rufus said he was in jail awaiting trial for murder. He said Bob had been attacked by a different girlfriend, and that this girlfriend's uncle and brother had joined in with a bat, and during the course of the fight the girlfriend pulled a knife and tried to stab him, but he got it away from her, and in the ensuing melee she was stabbed and died. He told me about a fish fry church was holding as a fundraiser for Bob's defense the following Sunday, and said I should attend. I agreed to be there. Prior to that Sunday I ran into another mutual friend, Warren, and asked if he had heard about Bob's self-defense fundraiser. Warren laughed nervously and said, self-defense? I said yes, and repeated the story Rufus has shared. Warren considered this, and then told me Bob had stabbed the girl 19 times. I was a little floored by this. I did not go to the fundraiser because it seemed way awkward, and in my heart it rang true, based on the anger issues Bob had displayed before. This was in 1989, and he is still in Angola State Penitentiary. I've posted this a while back, but here it is again. When I was in 8th grade we had our desks grouped together in 4s for math. Anyway, my paper was slipping between the cracks in the desk, and so I went to catch it. When I did, my pencil in my hand scratched the person in the desk connected to mine on his hand. When it did, he completely lost his cool and stabbed me with full force in the chest with a pencil. My reaction was to stab him in the wrist my pencil. It was pure adrenaline from the situation and I don't condone that action. Fast forward 3 years and the small town is buzzing with the news of a murder in one of the neighborhoods. The same boy who stabbed me in the chest snuck onto a wooded bike path with a box cutter in his booksack. He then attacked a 5-year-old boy by cutting his throat with the box cutter. The young boy had a twin and they were both adopted by the same family. Both adoptive parents were doctors. The boy who was killed has ridden a little bit ahead of his family on their right. By the time they caught up he was already dead and the attacker was gone. This is a guy that I played soccer with 4 years growing up, and even though we had our ups and downs he still hung out in our circle. I had been to his house a few times. I took it hard. We live in a very small town and it's all anyone spoke about for months. He is now at Angola serving life. Edit. Here is an article that found on the murder also. The boy was 8 not 5 like I thought. But the point still stands. I'll post what I wrote in another thread. In 9th grade, I met Jeremy. I told him I liked his Nirvana shirt, and he told me he liked my mismatched shoelaces. From that point on, we were great friends. Jeremy was so smart, he was funny, and he had a kind of originality in everything he did. Some kids picked on him for being different and a little intense, but most people liked to be around him. Jeremy and I were like brother and sister. We could talk about anything and everything. We talked so fast that others couldn't keep up with us, but we always knew what the other was saying. Both of us were being raised by very strict parents, and we were a little bit rebellious as a result. He wasn't allowed to cross a particular street because the bad read poor kids lived on the other side. We lived in a rich suburban town, and the poor kids were actually middle class. But I lived on the other side of that street, so he would often break the rules and visit me anyway. We would sit on my porch together and talk, but I would get caught. I wasn't allowed to sit on the porch when my mother wasn't home, and he would get caught, and we would both be grounded. We still wanted to see each other, so we would sneak out of our houses at night and meet at our favorite hidden spot. Eventually, we got caught sneaking out as well. My mother was frustrated beyond belief that her teenage daughter was rebelling so hard. I was sneaking out, smoking, skipping school, etc. She didn't know what to do with me. She'd ground me, but I would just do what I wanted anyway. Those few years were her nightmare. But eventually I settled down and grew out of it. I have a master's degree and I'm fairly successful. I look back on that time as a big part of who I am, and I regret very little. Jeremy's parents were frustrated that he was sneaking out of his house. So they sent him to a group home for troubled teens. While there, he met lots of kids with real behavioral issues and started going along with what they wanted to do. Eventually, they broke out, stole a car from a pregnant woman on her way to the hospital, and drove it into a lake. That was just the first in a series of crimes that Jeremy would commit. He was in and out of that group home until he turned 18. He would be released and then do some crime, serious or otherwise, and be sent back. The police in our town knew him on sight. He was arrested and sent to county jail a few months after his 18th birthday for something I can't remember, but it was probably possession of marijuana or something like that. He got out, and his parents wouldn't take him back in, so I hid him in my basement for a while, until my mom found out. Then he stayed with some friends from jail. He was arrested again for stealing, and sent back to jail. Then he accidentally burned down a shed he was sleeping in. This went on for the next few years. He was in and out of homelessness, and got deeper into drugs. I tried to be supportive, but it was hard when he wouldn't help himself. Eventually, somewhere in our 20s, we lost touch. Last year, I found his picture in the newspaper. His eyes were sunken and hollow, and he barely resembled my childhood friend. He had been arrested for bashing someone's head in with a hammer. This thread has been filled with the type of people who were always bad, but I share this story because that's not always the case. Sometimes those awful people we read about were good people who made a few bad choices and ended up as people we can't even imagine. I think we all have that within us, with just a few tweaks of circumstance. Two people I was friends with in high school, John and Amy, were high school sweethearts and went to the same college. She broke up with him right before Christmas break. The next week, they were both in our hometown for break and were at the same party. They got into a huge fight out in the street. He stabbed her in the head 14 times, put her in the trunk of his car, and drove off. He stopped at a gas station to fill up, presumably to flee the state. She somehow regained consciousness, released the emergency latch in the trunk, and went running and screaming to the gas station store. John ran. Clark called 911. She was life-flighted to the hospital. He was caught and is now in prison for life for attempted murder. Despite being stabbed in the brain 14 times and many brain surgeries, she survived and has completely recovered. Edit. Okay, I got this wrong. He knocked her out, put her in the trunk, she escaped, and then he stabbed her in the head 14 times. And he ended up only got 18 years in prison. The story I heard was different and the sentence changed because he was determined to have a personality disorder, I guess. Edit #2. He was able to get through the skull. I'm sure not every stab got through. This happened in early 2011 and her final brain surgery was last year. I'm not sure exactly how many surgeries she had, but it was more than a few. I also don't know what kind of knife it was, but based on things he had said to friends in the week leading up to the attempt, there's a consensus that it was somewhat premeditated. He must have obtained a knife that he knew could do maximum damage. My friend in college accidentally shot her boyfriend in the head with a pistol. It sounds weird, but they were messing around with it at home, and it went off and hit him in the face and killed him instantly. She originally told the police that he'd done it by mistake, but she later confessed to have been playing with it and not knowing it was loaded. They were planning a beach trip later that week and had just moved in together. She loved the hell out of him, and it was really sad. The lawyer said he handed her a pistol which she started to examine, and he had told her, "Let me make it safe," and took the clip out of it. He gave it back to her and said, "Now you can play with it." I would surmise that they had left a round in the chamber and that is the one that discharged, and unfortunately it struck him in the head and killed him. A year later, they are still listed as being in a relationship on Facebook. Her profile picture is a memorial image of him, and she only has a few people that keep up with her regularly. She went off the rails a bit, for understandable reasons, and I think this will haunt her forever. She wanted to be a doctor, which won't happen, and she was on a scholarship that was rescinded by the uni. It didn't impact me at all, so I didn't have to deal with it. I was just sad for her that this had happened, and sad that it ended something that was supposed to last a happy lifetime. One of my drill sergeants who everyone liked, he was your typical DS, but funny, and he had his cool moments. If he smoked the living shit out of a group or someone, he made sure to have spectators laughing. He was a good DS all and all. I even got to hang out with him during my 8 had a weekend pass. He saw me and 2 of my buddies walking. He stopped, picked us up, and we drove around, partied with him. Awesome time. Few years later on Facebook, a battle buddy posted an article stating that the same very cool DS who I once looked up to became a sheet bag, didn't show up to his job, didn't care anymore, got kicked out the army, was being a bum in his army girlfriend house. She wanted him out, and he ended up strangling the poor woman. He left the body upstairs and tried to cover up the smell with scents. He would go out, bring girls home, hook up with them on the couch. The ladies were interviewed, and they even stated that the house had a very strong scent of what seemed like car fresheners. He later dumped the body out in the front lawn and pretended he didn't know what was going on and acted shocked. He went to jail, and during trial he bragged to one of his cellmates that he did it, and they ain't gonna catch him cause he had a team of all-star lawyers backing him. He was wrong. This was 5 years ago or so. Still makes me think like, damn, faking guy was normal and somewhat of a role model, molding young people to be soldiers. One of my friends killed my closer friend, his brother. Why? It's all over the news and easily found, so fake names. Sam is one of those girls that feeds off of drama. Sam started faking Ellie because he was a pathological liar and had lots of drama potential. In the process of getting closer to him, she decided to hook up with his brother Scene. She decides to blow Ellie off and start dating Scene instead. Scene loved everyone, was always there to hang out or do whatever. He already survived a bout of bacterial meningitis, I believe it was, that put him into a coma. After his brush with death, he got even nicer somehow. Never held a grudge, would give you the shirt off his back. I actually saw him once do just that. Sam decided to play the one off the other, still texting Ellie, stringing him along. You know the drill. One night Ellie snuck into Scene's room. They fought. Ellie strangled Scene with a power cord until he fell off the bed. Somehow his neck got broken. Ellie then pushed Scene out the window of Scene's bedroom and buried him in the yard. Ellie texted Sam with Scene's phone saying he was running away to California. That night Sam hooked up with Ellie thinking Scene was gone. Fast forward a few days, the family got suspicious that Ellie had been burying some of Sam's things that she left in his room right around when Scene disappeared. Body was found. Everyone lost their minds. As far as I'm concerned, I don't even hate Ellie. I nothing him. Same goes for the mutual friend that was living with them and somehow didn't know the fight was happening in a room one room away. The one that totally didn't help Ellie lift or bury anything. Right. I would say that I nothing Sam, but I make it a point to tell everyone that if she hadn't played her stupid games, no one would have won those stupid prizes. I hope nothing but the worst for her. In the moment, I handled it because I had friends and family, and we all leaned heavily on each other to get through the initial shock, revelation, and media sheet show that resulted. Edit. There were a lot of red flags in hindsight. This was in Florida, where my parents live, and I honestly only got to visit everyone once or twice a year, so it was easy to let Ellie's bullshit go. One time he shot his 9mm through a few walls, where it lodged in the fridge. He claimed I did it when his parents questioned him. Oddly enough, they never mentioned it to me, so maybe even they didn't believe his shit. He was always telling stupid lies, doing sociopathic shit, like throwing their cat into the pool after it had been just chlorine shocked and claiming he had forgotten. But he was charming, so he always talked his way out of shit. And on my end, ignoring his bullshit twice a year and letting it go was easier than possibly alienating Scene and his wonderful family and parents. Had to Google the result again. Apparently got 50 years. His parents are so in grief about losing a second son that they are trying to appeal and say they believe his story. They will be dead before he has a chance at parole. If I find out he is up for parole, I will do everything in my power to keep him locked up. Oh shit, I finally can tell this story. I dated this guy for about 6 months and moved in with him essentially on the first date. I know, bad idea. He had some warning signs. He was always angry, sad and drunk. One time he stole my car, etc. But I was doing a lot of drugs and didn't notice/care. Anyway, I finally got clean, and a week later I decided I didn't want to be dating an alcoholic, so I broke up with him after asking to cut down on drinking for about a month. He did not take it well, so I agreed to stay friends. A week later, I was driving him to his dad's house and get a call from our roommate, who tells me that he was in prison for almost 2 decades for murdering his mother and had lied to us about everything. I did not handle it well. I managed to drop him off and take his key, but then pulled over about a mile from his dad's house and broke down. I had a lot of trouble with feeling safe after that, because a guy who killed his mom could sure as hell kill his ex. I wanted to turn to stone because of how afraid I was all the time. I moved, got a new job, got a new car, and changed my hair, but it still took several years to not worry all the time. My current boyfriend is an amazing and gentle man who was there through all of this, so he is really great about not being insulted when I insinuate he is a sociopath pretending to love me, so it will be more satisfying when he kills me. You know, normal relationship things. Seriously though, it took a long time, but I finally feel safe again. This is gonna get buried, but I guess I wanna get it off my chest as I very rarely talk about it. One of my cousins was responsible for the death of a girl and the lifelong paralysis of another. He was driving drunk. The dead girl was in the other car. The paralyzed girl was his passenger. I was very young when it happened, and thus am hazy on the details. I don't know the year it happened, so googling for the news is hard, because someone with his exact same name in our town murdered someone a few years later by coincidence, so most Google hits are about that guy. Anyway, I knew this guy for a while when I moved in with that part of the family, and one day I heard him joking about it, joking about how he'd gotten away with it and wasn't in prison. And I wasn't very old, but I was shaken to the core, and even more so when I asked my other cousin what he was talking about, and she told me all about it. And I'd never liked him. He was mean to animals and aggressive, but I hadn't thought he was dangerous. But he was joking about how he killed a girl and got away with it. Joking about how he'd caused his girlfriend to spend the rest of her life in a wheelchair. Joking while he sat there with a beer. Joking while he waved off the consequences. And I couldn't. I'd refuse to go anyway he was. After that, I stopped associating with that part of the family, and then, when people defended him or told me I was overreacting, I stopped associating with them too. And people still tell me that I was wrong for this, for cutting off huge parts of my family, but I can't tell myself that I was. I still get so upset about this. How can someone just sit there while he sits there making jokes about it? How can someone shrug that off because he happens to be related to them? How can they go hang out and play horseshoes with this guy and tell me that I'm unreasonable because it wasn't like he hurt me? There's only a couple of people left in my family that I talk to, and there were other catalysts for this, but the existence of this guy and their refusal to see why I didn't want to associate with him was a huge starting point. And some people tell me it's extreme, but it's not. I can't be friends with someone who jokes about murdering someone, and I can't be friends with people who defend him. Every time I think about this, I want to puke. Had a 17-year-old friend in high school, mid-1980s, who became involved with an older woman who was married to a doctor. The woman was a complete pill addict, and her husband prescribed everything she needed for her habit. Not a really good situation, even in 1984. As my friend's relationship with the married woman and his newfound addiction to pills became more intense, the doctor eventually grew suspicious of his wife and worried about the ramifications of what was going on. Apparently he decided to cut off their supply. Literally days after the pill fountain had been turned off, the wife lured him out into a field on their farm. Under the premise a cow had fallen into a creek and had broken its neck. Once there, my friend and the wife attacked the doctor, beating, stabbing, and shooting the man to death, and leaving him where he finally fell. Upon trying to leave the farm, my friend and the woman's car became stuck in the muddy pasture and they called a neighbor to help pull them out. It was this neighbor who noticed the blood on the woman's shirt and afterwards called the sheriff's department about something strange. The sheriff's department went to the farm and found the doctor's body laying in the creek, and within a matter of hours had arrested both the wife and my friend. Eventually my friend and the wife was convicted of first-degree premeditated murder and sentenced to death, where he still sits to this day, almost 30 years later. To answer the question of how I deal with it, I'll say this: I don't have to. The justice system did. And I'm glad that guy is out of society forever. I got halfway down the thread before I realized I had an applicable story. I normally don't. I have an uncle, basically, very close family friend, who grew up in my mom's house, best friends with my mom, aunt and uncle. Whole family was family friends. But Uncle Charles, name changed because he's been to prison for over 20 years, straightened himself out completely, gotten out, and moved away from the social stigma that our small town has for him, so I won't provide an article. The first time I met Uncle Charles, I was about 4, and we went to a prison to see him. I grew up not knowing what he'd done, but going to see him several times a year, and everyone in the family loved him, and once he got out, I was fully allowed to play with him unsupervised, etc., and nothing bad ever came of that. Eventually, at about 14, I found out what he had done, and had to deal with that, but after a few years, knowing him and loving him as kind of a father figure like I did, I was able to re-establish my connection with him, and we are still in touch to this day. On to the story of what he did. Charles started running with the wrong crowd and got into drugs when he was around 15. When he was 19, there was a drug deal that went wrong. He and his friend were ripped off, but they knew the people who had done it and knew where they lived. They got loaded and went to the trailer park where these guys lived and found them in one of their trailers with their girlfriends/wives. Uncle Charles tied up everyone with duct tape and took the women into a different room. Then, he went back into the other room and interrogated the men, roughing them up until they found out where the money and drugs were. At this point, Uncle Charles went into the back room and told the women that they were leaving. Everyone is alive and mostly unharmed. Don't call the police etc. At this point, a shot was heard from the other room. His friend had killed one of the tied up men. His story was that he was waving it around in his face threatening him, and it went off, but the other guy that was tied up said otherwise, and no one else saw it, so we'll never know. Either way, my Uncle Charles was an accessory to murder, and several other things. This will get buried, but here goes. I grew up with a kid. We will call him Adam, because that was his name. He came to my house several times to play duck hunt, but nobody was ever allowed in. His parents were weird. Dad was snake oil salesman type lawyer. Mom super high strung, borderline psychotic. Rumors were that they put him in a cage when he acted up. When we were young, he was a cool kid. Kinda strange, but always happy. Possibly autistic, but we didn't call it that back then. Around puberty age, he shifted. No more friends, no hanging out. In class one day, 7th grade, out of nowhere he snapped his pencil in half and threw it on the floor, then told the teacher that I did it, so I got in trouble. On the way home from school that day, I was walking, and he rode past on his bike and kicked me and laughed. He swung back around to do it again, and I stuck a stick through his front spokes. He came off the bike, we exchanged a few punches. Random passerby stops and breaks us up. A month or so later, he stabbed a kid in the arm with a pencil in the bathroom. Not poked, stabbed. Inch or so deep, broken pencil, crying kid. Completely unprovoked. A few months later, my mom was served with a lawsuit for my previous attack on Adam. The small town judge heard both sides, warned us both to stop fighting, and dismissed the suit. On the way out of court, my mom told his dad, and I remember this clear as day: if you don't hold your son responsible for his actions, he is going to grow up and do something horrible. Flash forward to 2005. The code enforcement officer in our small town was making his follow-up visit to the property where Adam, 24-ish years old, still lived with his parents. The officer was taking pictures of the violations he had previously warned them about. Grass way too tall, junk in the yard, collapsing porch, etc. Adam comes outside. They argue. Adam goes back inside and comes back out with a .45 semi-auto. The code enforcement officer runs. Adam empties 9 rounds into him as he is running away. The code enforcement officer's dad was the responding EMT. His son died in his arms. After 10 years, and all of his appeals were exhausted, Adam was put to death by lethal injection last year. I blame his parents as much as him. TLDR. Grass too tall. Weird kid. Boom boom. X9. 2 kids dead. Not a friend, but a family member. Last year, my niece murdered my nephew while he slept. He was a severely brain damaged child, about 2 to 3 years mental age at the most. He was 20 at the time, and she was 15. She had apparently planned it for around a month, and one night she had hidden the biggest knife she could find in her room. Middle of the night, she went into his room and cut his throat. She then went outside, called the police, and waited for them to arrive. My girlfriend, friends, and therapist tell me I've dealt reasonably with it. I spent around a month after the fact at home, or visiting my therapist. I drank a lot, and slept little. She's been tough. I was supposed to hand in my master's thesis last summer, but this made me lose my ability to write academically. I spent 3 to 4 months before I was even ready to try writing again, and I didn't really get back into the swing of things until 2 to 3 months ago. My family was small to begin with. I only have my mom and my sister. I can understand that my sister feels like she has to keep a connection to her daughter. After all, it's better to lose 1 child than 2, even if she is a murderer. Hell, I can even accept that it's easier for my mom to support my sister in that endeavor. What I can't deal very well with is that they do not accept my feelings of anger towards my niece. She felt like her brother was in the way and murdered him in cold blood. I've since gotten a tattoo to honor the memory of my nephew. I feel like my family has forgotten about him and forgiven the murdering piece of shit that is my niece way too soon and too easily. My aunt on my mother's side, Molly, married a guy named Mike, and they had 2 kids. He was always really cool, and I liked him a lot. I loved Molly so much. She was the youngest of my mother's siblings, and was always a cool aunt. She'd talk about shit that was actually relevant to me and my sister, as we were teenagers at the time, and didn't sugarcoat things. She was really funny and fun to be around, and Mike was just as cool. Well, fast forward some years later, and I came home on my first leave/pass when I was in the army. I was about to go out with my sister to meet with friends and rage in a few bars, since I had just turned 21 and hadn't been home since I left for basic training 9 months earlier. My mom got a call from one of her sisters and told her that Molly had been killed. Mike and Molly had been going through a rough time apparently, and she was thinking of leaving him. He quoted their vows, "Till death do us part," and strangled her. He then walked into their backyard and blew his brains out. They had 2 beautiful little girls, and they just lost their parents in a single night in a horrific way. They weren't there at the time. Mike had dropped them off at a babysitter's for the night for a sleepover. I hate him. I hope the bastard is burning in hell for what he did. He was a selfish coward and I'll never forgive him. I miss Molly and cry every time I think of her, so I tend to keep it out of my thoughts. When I see my little cousins, it hurts me because I can see so much of her in them. I love and care for them deeply though. I wish they lived near me, but they live near another of my aunts in Ohio and I know they are well taken care of. I wonder what kind of women they will grow up to be, and I hope they turn out okay. And that's all I have to say about that. My junior year of college, my roommate and I had Guy, Charlie, in our major, Christian Studies major, regularly stay with us in our dorm. He lived off campus about 45 minutes away and liked being able to just stay on campus the nights before he had early classes. We all got along great and were all planning on going into Christian ministry. After our junior year I took a job pastoring a small rural church and moved into the parsonage, and he and my old roommate got an apartment together. Over that summer I referred him to another local church to be their youth minister. We did a lot of work together, took a lot of classes together, and became pretty close. We were both present for each other's engagements and had plans to be groomsmen in each other's weddings. The February of my final semester in college, my old roommate and I were working out and I could tell something was wrong. I asked him about it and he said his pistol he had hidden under his bed for security reasons had gone missing and he didn't know what had happened. About 2 hours later, Charlie's fiancée was found shot dead in her car just off of campus. We instantly went to the hospital to be with Charlie as Charlie instantly began telling people she committed suicide. I stayed there until I got a call from my stepdad telling me I needed to come home because he felt that there was a lot more to the story. Sure enough, 2 days later Charlie was arrested for the murder of his fiancée. Those feelings were extremely difficult. I felt betrayed and lied to, but at the same time I knew that I was going through nothing compared to her family, so I didn't want to voice my feelings and place the attention on me when all the attention deserved to be placed on the family that lost their daughter. Since then I've somewhat moved on. It's been over 2 years now. He's serving 40 years in prison, and I find it much harder to trust people at times. Here's the link to article of when he confessed. Here's a picture of him and me outside the church I was working at. TLDR, one of my close college friends that I worked in ministry with murdered his fiancée. My best friend since 8th grade called me once after suddenly being gone for 8 months and told me he had just gotten out of jail for killing the neighbor's cat, beating his mom, and threatening his little brother with a knife, who ended up locking himself inside the bathroom to hide. I hung out with him for a while after because he would only gradually reveal the shit he had done. I also figured he could get a chance to straighten out, but he would just keep doing it and wanted me to join and cheat, so I cut contact. He also talked about fantasies about being a serial killer or rapist. He is just getting worse and worse, and he recently went inactive on Facebook for 6 months. Very active both before and after those 6 months. Plus some family members started commenting on his pictures asking where he was. I'm a little scared he'll carry a grudge and do some shit with my house or kill my cat or my family. Stopped meeting him a year ago and haven't said a word to him since November. He's also extremely proud of being a psychopath and scoring high on one of those psychopath tests. I'm trying to build the courage to go and warn the police about the shit he has told me, just so they keep an eye on him. Pretty sure he is already under moderate surveillance due to gathering crimes, as if they were Pokemon cards. He is one of the people who are immune to rehabilitation and only understand punishment. My best friend in elementary and middle school murdered her boyfriend's mother. She was always pretty normal, had kind of a messed up family and her dad was kind of a creep, but she was a good student, etc. Our freshman year of high school, she got into drugs really bad and started running away constantly. We still hung out some, but I was hanging with other people more. She had a boyfriend who was a weirdo. I think he was a year or 2 ahead of us. She started staying with him until finally his mother told her that she had to leave or she was going to turn her in. My friend and her boyfriend ended up shooting his mother a bunch of times and, as far as I know, stayed in the house for some time after. At trial, it came out that she was pregnant and they were both convicted of murder because it was never proven who actually killed her. I was locked up with her for a short time while she was awaiting trial. I was a wild kid as well and had lunch with her one of the days. I asked her what had happened and she flat out told me I shot the beach. Because she was only 14, she was tried as a juvenile and was released when she was in her early 20s. She got out, married a mutual friend of ours, and is living a normal, suburban life in our hometown, married with a couple kids, and is a manager at a local business. Wow, this applies to me. My best friend murdered his dad. Long story short, his mother raised him without a dad, and with a little brother, who had a different father who also wasn't around. At an appropriate age she explained to him the reason why his dad wasn't around is because he was abusive and beat her wildly and that he was the product of rap. She moved 1,000 miles away and changed their last name. Around his 18th birthday his dad tracked him down. He explained to him that the whole time his mother had lied, that she was the person that was abusive and that she ran away to keep the child away from him. Well, my friend turned on his mother, who was also pretty much my mother, because of how close we were. He ditched being my friend to go live with his dad. His dad had tons of money. His dad sold high volumes of heroin and was somewhat notorious. He started doing any drug you could think of, and he had stacks of cash. They became business partners. Well, one alcohol and drug infused night they argued. His dad told him in vivid detail about what he had really done to his mother. She had told the truth the whole time. His dad was the liar. So my old friend proceeded to stab his old man 45 times. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison. I was always shocked it was only 20 years. He gets out in 2024. Haven't spoke a word to him since I was 18. I have requested visitation at his prison, but never get a response. Years ago I worked in sales. Because this company paid almost no salary and all commission, their hiring process was loose. They had no problem hiring people whose only sales history was drugs, no sheet. But there were only a few regular/long-term salesmen. We'd go out drinking after work, strip clubs, have small parties in the showroom at the end of a good month. One of the guys was always a bit ghetto, but very smart. Big guy. Very good talker too. He could charm and scare the shit out of you in the same conversation. He had an adorable little girl that he worked hard to make sure she was taken care of. A few months after I left that place, his face was literally on the cover of every newspaper in New York, and there was a nationwide manhunt that lasted several days, maybe weeks. Apparently he was still a ghetto thug at heart and couldn't let that go. Despite having a $100K job, he was still stealing cars and doing stupid shit. One night he was doing his thing in a stolen car and got pulled over. Decided at that moment that he'd do anything he could not to go back to jail. These officers had no idea what they were walking into. My coworker had 2 passengers in the car and they were all armed. The officers had no chance to defend themselves and were shot and killed. It was surreal to see the face of a coworker with whom I'd hung out, shared a desk, ate meals with, drank with, all over the news. Watching him do the perp walk on national TV going into court. Upon reading the articles I found out the guy was a real piece of garbage. He had previous convictions for sexual assault, sodomy, robbery and some more things. I wouldn't say that he was very close to me or anything, but we still got along pretty well with each other. I first saw him in welding class when I was in grade 11. He was a fairly goofy guy, about 6 feet 4 inches, light brown hair, a bit of a nerd. He wasn't built or anything, but he wasn't overweight. We would always goof around in welding class, do impressions of Louie Anderson, purposely get in each other's way for the sheets and giggles of it. So time goes by, I graduate high school, end up befriending him on Facebook, etc. Now the last time I saw him was at a fairly popular bar/nightclub. Can't remember what the hell we were talking about, because we were both pretty drunk at the time, but now that I think about it, he might have mentioned something about shooting guns. Again, I don't know, since I had a bunch of alcohol in me, but I wouldn't have a doubt in my mind that we did. So time goes by more, and he starts posting things on Facebook like, wouldn't it be funny if I shot up a bunch of people and made it on the 6 o'clock news? And lyrics to some punky/emo songs. The last thing he posted on Facebook was a line from the Joker from The Dark Knight. And one night, he goes off crazier than usual. Mommy gets the kitchen knife to defend herself. He doesn't like that. Not one bit. My sister, who works for a local newspaper, got married in June of 2012. 2 days later, I have to go to downtown to a bank to take out some euros for her honeymoon. Before this, though, I get phone calls from my half-brother, who also works for a newspaper, asking me if I knew this guy. I said yes. So I get calls from the media asking me to describe this person. I described him as kind of a quiet, silly guy, but a bit off. I also found out what the hell this guy did. He was working for G4S as an armed security guard. During one of his nightly shifts, he shot 4 of his other colleagues, 3 of which died. I noticed that what I said describing him ended up in a news article. I called back the news agency to have it taken down immediately, because holy shit. There is this maniac on the loose with multiple guns. I had that empty woe feeling between listening to the radio talking about him and listening to a bunch of why would anyone do this And what a faking asshole type comments from my parents. I just stared out the window, just in disbelief. That empty woe feeling as I stared out the window, just watching everything drive by, like something you would see in a movie. He was on the loose for a while, and there was basically a North America-wide warrant for his arrest. They finally caught him when he tried to cross the border into the USA. He ended up getting. So in other words, he is going to end up getting faked in the ass by his cellmates without any parole until he turns 61. Good. I hope he mothers a child with another inmate. Now you can probably guess how I feel about it now lol. Knowing what he was like for the short amount of time I knew him, he's probably going to end up killing himself. He wasn't my friend, but he was my cousin's friend and he frequently joined our family vacations, so he was around quite a bit. He was 15 and my cousin was 14 when one night they decided to have a sleepover at my cousin's house that lived a few houses down from me. I remember waking up to the sound of a helicopter landing in my street. Turns out the friend stabbed my cousin 39 times in his sleep. He's changed his story several times to my cousin came onto him sexually. They're both boys. My cousin tried stabbing him first, and he stabbed back in self-defense. He was mad that my cousin beat him in a video game and taunted him about it. My cousin's sister and mom helped him kill my cousin. I remember riding my bike a few days after it happened down the street and saw my cousin's blood all over the front porch from when they took him out to the helicopter. So we don't know what happened. The police did a shitty investigation and the first trial he was charged with first-degree murder. But the judge gave the jury some wrong info, so we had to do the whole trial over again. My family couldn't handle going through it and let him take a plea deal. Manslaughter, 15 years. He's been in prison for 16 years for brutally murdering my cousin, and he is to be released in 2 weeks to the free world. So I'm dealing with that now. Not a close friend, but his father. I met Brian 3 years ago in 9th grade, and he was the nicest possible guy. Didn't curse, smoke, whatever, just a nice Christian kid. He was always super enthusiastic, positive, and supportive. Throughout freshman and sophomore year, we would talk about things I usually couldn't say to other people, and he saved my ass so many times with homework. This was also a time when I didn't have a phone, so I didn't really keep up with him outside of real life. But I didn't have that many friends, so for all intents and purposes, we were close friends, to me, at least. Beginning of junior year, I'm going home on the subway with my friend Kelly. We are joking and yelling at each other, and her friend calls her. I'm watching her with a smile on my face waiting to continue what I was going to say, and I watch as her face of happiness turn to horror, then feel mine turn to the same, when she tells me the news. Brian's father had slit Brian and his mother's throats, slit his own wrists, and then proceeded to burn down the apartment they lived in. Apparently they had been living in poverty for the past 8 years, and the few things that made them happy were church, and in Brian's case, school. It was just heartbreaking. Even though the funeral procession was in another language except for a short paragraph from his cousin, it made me tear up, and by the time his cousin spoke, I just broke out crying. I still think of him nearly every day, and he inspires me to be a better person. Wowness credit I can actually contribute to. Although he wasn't my close friend, he was a big part of my group of friends in HS, so I often saw/interacted with him. So anyways, I knew this guy in high school, and he was the kind of guy who thought he was the smartest guy in the room. Every time I encountered him, he was either bragging or talking about some highbrow science sheet. He also cyber-stalked 2 of my female friends, and would frequently say the weird sheet that you only make fun of neckbeards for. Stuff like how he's so intelligent and caring he would make the best most suitable mate. The first red flag was when he threatened and chased his father with a knife. He was 15 to 17 at the time. Apparently his father had hit him for calling his mother a faking hoe, so he chased his father around saying shit, like we are going to talk about this, or I'm going to kill you, kinda like Jack from The Shining. Anyways, he went off to college, and then about a year or 2 later his father cut him off so he had to drop out and come back to our small shitty city in FL. He was a spiteful guy, so this must have really angered him. Then about a year later he attacked his mother, injuring her using a hammer, and then fled into the woods. I'm not sure what happened after that, but I guess he went to live with his father. Parents divorced and ended up killing him in a brutal way and attempted to hide the body, but his father's G/F came by while he was trying to dispose of the body and forced him to flee again. The police looked for him for a few days while everyone gossiped about what happened. He apparently went back to the college town he lived in where all his friends from high school were at and tried to find them. They had just moved, so he wasn't able to, and ended up shooting himself in the head instead of facing justice. It was pretty surreal at the time because so many people seemed to defend his actions and treated his death as if he was some sort of angel. The dude killed his father and then took his own life. He was definitely a guy who had some problems, but it was still a surprise to me. I didn't know about him threatening his father or attacking his mother until I found out about his murder/suicide. Here's a link, even talks about his past history. I was friends with Caleb fairly when I was in college. He seemed mostly normal, aside from a pretty big obsession with porn, and had tons of it. Magazines stacked up, piles of videotapes, etc. This was in 1995, and, while porn on the internet existed, it was mostly low-res, by 2016 standards, pictures and that's it. If you were lucky enough to find a video, it was 150x150, 6 seconds long, and took 45 minutes to download. Effectively, porn didn't exist in an easily consumable way on the net. This guy had spent his money buying all these videos and magazines, and he clearly spent a lot on porn. Like, probably thousands. Anyway, aside from his gigantic porn collection, he seemed like a pretty normal guy. A little weird, but everyone I hung out with in college was a little weird. I was too. I wasn't super close with this guy, but I saw him a lot. He came back to my place a few times and we played Magic. I went over his house once. I met his mother and little sister, and they both seemed normal to me. Nothing strange about them. In case you don't feel like clicking on the link, he committed double murder and killed a woman and her 19-month-old kid after she, the mother, refused to have sex with him. Then he wrapped her corpse after he killed her. As luck would have it, I was out of the country around this time, a failed attempt to live in New Zealand, and here's where there's a discrepancy that bugs me. I got back in mid-August 1995 and I remember immediately hearing Caleb had killed. However, Wikipedia said the murders happened on September 10th, which would have been several weeks after I got home. Regardless of that, my reaction was along the lines of, "Are you serious? He really did that?" It was weird and my brain didn't know how to process it, so it didn't. My group of college friends and Caleb's group of college friends had a large amount of overlap, so we all knew. We never really mentioned him again after the initial shock of it happening. Not a great story, but that's how it went. I had a coworker who was bipolar and had all sorts of shit going on in his life, losing his wife and kid, losing his house, claiming bankruptcy and about to lose his job. Well, all in all I could see he was insanely depressed and was afraid he would commit suicide. So about 5 days a week he would come hang out with my fam. Just doing normal shit, watching movies, eating dinner, just normal shit. Well, a few months of this, he starts randomly seeing some girl and things start to brighten up. Well, fast forward, we are at my house, and he starts to act a little weird. There was 4 of us, so we were playing some beer pong. Then my fiancé notices he keeps turning around or doing something off. Turns out he was doing bumps of coke in my living room where my 2 years old and 6 years old are running around. Kinda lost my temper, almost threw him out, but made him put a sheet in his car and just hang out. Couple hours go by, and he says he just got a booty call from his girl. We knew he was Leon's course. His phone was being used to play music and it never went off. Convinced him to stay a little bit longer. Then he leaves saying he has to meet this girl, but he won't tell us her name. Guess he left, went to a bar by his house, hung out with a bartender he kinda was seeing, then left right before close. When she closed up and started walking home, he came up behind her and shot her, leaving her laying there to die. Police found her hours later still alive, but she didn't make it. Meanwhile he fled the state and was arrested. It was weird, no one had any idea, but after a few days I went by his house to see if he was there, alive, but his truck was gone, so I didn't think anything of it. Came home and got a call telling me the news. It sucks, I feel for the girl and her family, but I feel for him. Yes, he is scum. But fuck, it was obvious something bad was going to happen. The running thought at work was he is gonna kill himself soon. No one thought murder was an option. Since it happened I changed jobs and haven't heard a thing about him since. He rarely crosses my mind unless someone mentions the bar he was at or I have to go down the street it happened. In my teenage years, I worked at Walmart. One of my positions was the pet department manager. Under me in that department was an older, medically retired Vietnam vet we'll call Bob. He always told me stories of the war and his wife, who was also retired military. They, though they were in their 50s then, just had a child. They had their struggles, but overall seemed very happy in their decision to start a family. I eventually joined the army and left Walmart. After 6 years, I decided to get out and became a sheriff's deputy. One night while working a jail stint, I noticed a feeble old man being escorted to population by himself, which was somewhat unusual, but I'd recognize that waddle anywhere. It was Bob. Once the deputies escorting Bob came back by release, where I was stationed that night, I verified that it was in fact Bob, and why he had to have a special escort. Turns out Bob and his wife were not doing too well in these later years and she decided she was going to leave him. While she was in her room packing her things with the now 7 to 8-year-old once newborn in the room with her, Bob, in a pissed-drunk state, shot several rounds through the door with a revolver, one striking his missus in the head. After hearing his daughter scream, he kicked open the door, saw what he had done, called the police, and sat on the porch waiting for their arrival. Fast forward, he pleaded guilty and is now serving his life sentence for the murder of his wife. Over the next several months, I visited Bob whenever I was at the jail, played cards with him and other inmates, and told stories of my deployment like he once did for me. Not once did either of us mention the reasons behind our reunion, and we eventually parted ways. I can't say there was ever a need to cope with any of what he did. It just remained an unspoken understanding that we weren't at Walmart anymore. My cousin killed his parents. He's actually my third cousin, but in our family, cousins are cousins. I had hung out with him a handful of times when we were getting together with that side of the family. He was around 20 years old and an only child of his 50-year-old working parents. Grew up in a middle-class suburb. Around his teens, he was loosely supervised and became involved with teen/young adults who were involved in drugs/thuggery. While he was on the wrong track, at the time no one thought it was more than juvenile foolishness and assumed he would eventually straighten out. One day, I was sat down by my parents and told that both my aunt and uncle had been shot to death by my cousin. I remember being surprised, and yet not overly so. I'm not going to say I saw it coming, but I wasn't ever in disbelief or utter shock like my parents/rest of the family. Can't really explain that. There were no red flags, even in retrospect. The trial was a shit show. He fired multiple public defenders and then represented himself with extensive rants and irrelevant ramblings in the courtroom and had wildly inconsistent and fantastical versions of events. It was pathetic. There was obviously some mental illness/disconnect from reality. How he was found competent to stand trial is something I still wonder about. Needless to say, he is spending life in prison. The family doesn't really talk about it, mostly because there's nothing more to say. I only kind of remember this, so please bear with me. When I was about 8 or 9, one of my dad's friends murdered his wife. They got into a fight in the garage and he threw a belt sander at her head and killed her. This was in the white upper middle class suburbs. This guy was on my dad's soccer team. He didn't show up for a couple of practices and no one had seen his wife walk the dog for a few days, so people started to worry. I remember my dad and a couple of the soccer guys were hanging out at our house after a barbecue and decided to pop over to this guy's house to see what he was up to. They came back a while later and sat on the deck and drank beer and had this tense conversation. Apparently the guy had tried to play it cool, but their spidey sense was tingling. A few weeks later the guy was arrested. They had found his wife's body in a park. Here is the really faked up part. The guy had sort of frozen up after the belt sander thing. He left his wife's body in the garage until that weekend, when he had to go pick his kids up from summer camp. He put the body in his trunk, picked them up, then took them out for ice cream, with their mom's body in the trunk. I don't know what he told his kids, or when he actually dumped the body in the park, but to this day, when someone is like, hey, let's go get ice cream, I get kinda creeped out. I apologize for the length of this story. If you read it or not, it was very therapeutic for me to talk about. This will probably be buried, but I need to vent, and this just happens to be the highlight of what has been overwhelming my thoughts day and night since I found out 7 months ago. My best friend and I met when we were 7 years old. We were born in the same year, just a few days apart, and became inseparable when we met. Despite a few life-altering situations, we have lived apart in different cities many times, but still kept in touch daily, and even when we were in the same cities we always seen each other. We are 23 now. I found out in October that when we were 19 she had a baby who died within hours of birth. She's facing murder charges for killing her own newborn, and it's to be sorted out this year. I found out through the news, headlines, trending articles all over social media. Apparently the no publicity ban, or whatever, was lifted early last year. She had kept it a secret for her own reasons nobody will ever know, and she continued to do so even when the radio stations and newspapers were announcing it all. I'm still dealing with a ton of emotions that are so unfamiliar and big. For 4 years this woman kept this secret, this thing that she only knew amongst a few authoritative officials / doctors. I don't know the story of what happened, or what she was thinking during it all. I used to look back on our 19th birthday as such a huge fun time in my life with her, together with my best friend. No worries or struggles. Just good times, good friends, and great lives ahead of us. I look back at it now, I see the photos of us laughing and looking into the camera, and I see a woman I hardly know. My best friend was 4 to 5 months pregnant, knowingly, allegedly in my brain, drinking hard liquor and coolers all hours of the night. She didn't do it just that one night. It was summertime, we just turned 19. Drinking like that was another night for us. We loved to party. After that summer we went on to university. We were supposed to live together, but it didn't happen. I still saw her every day. All of this, and I had no idea she was pregnant. Yes, looking back, she did gain weight. I honestly did not care. I assumed it was how much she drank. As long as she was happy, I was happy for her. She was the last person you would think would ever hurt a soul. She was always so caring, and had this strong mothering / nurturing instinct about her with her family / friends' babies. She loved kids. She was such an amazing person, always so happy, and everyone thought she had such a positive / innocent outlook towards life and its craziness. I knew she had a small part of her that was mysterious, but that was something special, almost that only I could see in her. She wouldn't let anyone know anything, unless she wanted you to. She always waited for the right moment to tell you things. If you asked about it before she was ready to spill the beans, she'd just say I don't know, and you'd have to live with it until she was super shattered, or till a genuine moment came along. Never would I have thought this would be one of the many things she's kept locked up inside of her. She's not the same person I knew and loved since everyone started finding out. She told me a lot of people asked about it, but she hasn't told any friends or family her story. I respected her wishes and my feelings for her never ever changed. I tried to keep our friendship as normal as I could with how she was acting. I tried not hurting her with my feelings and opinions, and kept them all to a minimal. Then she became a stranger. Destructive. Abusive. Alcoholic. Reckless. I held on for over 7 months, and decided for my own well-being and sanity I had to let go and start healing. You can't help somebody who doesn't want it, and that will be the hardest lesson I'll ever have to learn and pass on to others going through tough obstacles in life. She changed and started to hurt everybody, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. That's when I lost my respect for her. She would try to justify her disturbing and destructive behavior as enjoying the rest of her freedom and that it was better for everybody that she disconnects. The further down the road we got, the more and more she would indirectly reveal that she felt she was going to go away, jail, psych ward. I guess deep down I wanted to believe that it was an accident or that the baby wasn't strong enough and died in an uncommon way. I'm naive for wanting to believe that, but I refused to judge or abandon her. In time the feeling that it was premeditated began to set in, as well as the crazy realization of it all. To reach a somewhat conclusion to this mess, for you at least, I refused to engage, encourage, or listen to her rave about these messed up things she was doing. I refused to be her yes man on her journey to complete and utter self-destruction and alienation. I quit replying to her faked up texts and messages gloating about how bruised her knuckles were this day than the last faked up thing she did when she was blacked out drunk. I quit encouraging her to deal with it however she wanted to, as she was not dealing with it head on. In my heart I feel like she could have been in therapy yada yada, or showing that she is a good person deep down and proving she's not a danger to society, rather than running way to East Jesus nowhere being a total heat score in catching more dangerous charges. And since I refused to listen to her last mistake, she then threatened me to never ever tell me her story of her little incident, and if I couldn't be patient, we should stop wasting each other's time. At this point it wasn't about the story. I never wanted to know the details of how her child died. I never wanted to know, unless I was the right person for her to confide in. I would have done anything to help her reach closure. I respected her not telling anybody other than the court/doctors. All I wanted was for her to get help. At that point I reached my limit. I couldn't be her friend anymore. I feel bad. I feel like a monster not sticking through with it in a major time of need. I can't even justify my absence in her life right now. She needed a friend, yet I chose to leave because I felt that I was under so much grief. This grief I felt is probably nothing compared to what is on her shoulders. I didn't leave her in a spiteful way. I explained as well as I could have, yet I know she won't understand why for a long time. I wished her well and hoped she gets help. Whenever I think about the end of our friendship, I feel okay. I know it will take time to heal, but I knew it had to happen for a while there. It's random things that was almost her or our signature moments together that make my heart sink. Like coming across something she taught me first how to do, or a movie we always watched together and so forth. That's what makes it harder to even talk about. I thought I was just overthinking it. I had a dream about her last night. She was walking angrily past me, and I stopped her in her tracks, pulled her to me, and held her, and I told her I'll always love her. She was crying. I confided in my brother about it, and he said maybe it was a spirit-to-spirit dream. I know she felt it too. And I will always love her, no matter what comes of us in our lifetimes. One of my best friends from kindergarten is currently on trial for rape and murder. We hadn't stayed close. We had drifted apart as kindergarten best friends are wont to do later in elementary school, but it was sad to see it happen. I don't pretend to be deeply affected by it, since we weren't close anymore, but it was a shame to see. I remember him as being sort of temperamental. We'd be playing together just fine, and he'd suddenly get furious at me and say he hated me. I would get confused, but his mom would say, "Don't worry, sweetie, it's not you. He just does that sometimes. He'll come around." And he would. His mom told my mom he had some sort of emotional issues they were still trying to figure out. Anyway, all that aside, it's a weird feeling. You don't think you'd ever be friends with the perpetrator. Maybe it's because when things like that happen, the victim's family and friends are a lot more vocal, so even uninvolved you see what kind of reactions and feelings are normal or make sense, but the perpetrator side stays quiet. You don't want to excuse their actions, because you know what they did is wrong, but it's a weird feeling to see people call them some inhuman monster, when you only ever saw their human side, and when you knew they existed outside of their crime. What he did was terrible, and maybe that makes him a terrible person, but it seems weird when you try to match what they've become up with how you knew them. Again, I'm not really close enough to the situation to even pretend I'm deeply affected by it. This is just how I make sense of it in my head. Had a buddy who was always a bit of a fuck up. Can't really decide whether it was the home he originally came from, or if he was always gonna end up down the path he went, but he stabbed and killed his grandma in a fit of meth-fueled rage. She took him in around middle school to high school age, but somewhere around 7th maybe 8th grade to sophomore, 10th grade, yeah, he started to get into partying and whatnot. We all did around freshman year, but this friend of mine used to love drinking and getting high. More so as the years went on. This caused a lot of strife between his grandmother and him. It was almost no surprise to a few people when he started dabbling in meth. At this point his grandfather had passed away, and his grandma couldn't really keep him in check anymore. This all culminated in a heated discussion with his grandma, where he took a knife and stabbed her. It's at this point that I stop remembering so much, and the details get fuzzy, but I do believe he was captured in a parking lot trying to slit his wrists, due to being cornered, before the police got him. That little bit right there is hearsay though. We were pretty good friends in high school, and would skip homeroom to smoke a J sometimes. I liked him when he was sober or not on alcohol. He changed as the years went on, dropped out before junior year and I stopped talking to him before the meth stuff, but every time he was faked up he was definitely not in control of himself. I can only imagine how he got once he started doing meth. I'm sure he regrets what he's done, since he's gone to jail and whatnot, but that'll never change what he did. Life's crazy guys. TLDR, local man stabs grandmother with knife in meth fueled rage. That was probably not a newspaper headline, but it sure sounds like one. Okay, so it wasn't murder, but one of my friends in high school was a serial rapist. In high school I was an outsider, and I spent a lot of time with kids that didn't fit in. It wasn't bad. We would all hang out and play chess and Pokemon and D&D. We actually started a Magic the Gathering club so we could hang out on campus after school hours. We were all quirky and nerdy and weird, but Doug definitely stood out in that regard. Doug was awkward, and there wasn't any other way to put it. He would say things that made everyone uncomfortable. Whenever he lost in a game, it was his personal mission to get revenge. Once after I beat him in Magic he told me to take my deck apart or he would beat me with a bat. I thought he was just a sore loser who took things too far. Also, he was jealous. If you were talking to a girl, even giving her help with homework, he had to be talking to her too. He ruined my friend's relationship with a girl by stalking her and calling her multiple times some nights to ask about their relationship. I remember he once told one of my friends from drama club, a tiny innocent freshman, she looked like she would be fun to tie up. She never stayed near him again. Anyway, 2 years after I graduate I get a text from Cody, a close friend who graduated with me. He asked me if I had heard about Doug. Apparently he had been rapping his younger sister for years, and we never even suspected. He got caught because he was at a summer camp and bragged to a counselor about having sex regularly. The counselor asked who he was having sex with, and Doug told him to his face. It was surreal. For a while I blamed myself for not seeing the signs, but after a while I began to realize that I couldn't have known, and it should have been his parents who recognized the signs first. Not a close friend, but we had a few classes together, and we'd hung out in the same circle of friends. He was a little weird, socially awkward, and had that kind of desperate just accept me as a cool kid thing. He was a dork, but so were we, so we didn't really think he was that weird. A few years after high school, we heard about what happened. He was still living at home, unemployed and unhappy. Apparently he became depressed and started to show signs of schizophrenia and aggression. One day he walked into the local bakery, wearing a shirt with blood on it, orders a coffee and I guess a snack. Finishes his meal, and walks down the street to the police station. Turns himself in for murdering his father, mother, and 3-year niece. Apparently he was in an argument with his dad, and he later stabbed him in the back of the neck. His mom and niece were in the house. She had gone to see what had happened upstairs. She suffered defensive wounds, and was also stabbed to death. The 3 years was his sister's kid, who was actually in another country at the time. She was killed in her crib. I have no idea what possessed him to do any of this. He was a nice guy, easy to push over sadly. This happened about 4 years ago. He was only 23 at the time. I don't think there's even been a trial yet. He was not competent to stand trial until recently. I'm just glad I didn't see him that day. That bakery is central to the community and I lived down the street at the time. Guy I knew all through school and even went on a couple of dates with, got a girl pregnant right after college. Everybody who knew her knew she was trouble. but he did the right thing and married her, even though they weren't anywhere near compatible. They argued all the time and she hated his family, even though his people are really nice. One weekend, she goes off on a drinking binge and doesn't come home for a couple of days. He takes care of the baby as usual, except he goes to his dad's church for Sunday services and to his folks' house for dinner, something his wife would never let him do. He takes the baby back home and she's there. She tells him she wants a divorce, the house, her car, alimony, and child support. She tells him that he's not the baby's father and she's going to make sure he never sees the child again. She rips the baby out of his arms and tells him to get out. He takes the gun off the frig and shoots her in the head while she's holding the baby in her arms. Then he calls the cops on himself. He pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and served 10 years in prison. He could have held out for a better plea, but he felt guilty about what he'd done. Afterwards, he moved back home with his folks. He works on the family farm because he can't get any other job. I say hi to him when I see him. I don't treat him any differently than I did before, except I never mention his ex or her daughter. Turns out the baby really wasn't his. The grandparents took custody of her and terminated any rights he might have had while he was in prison. I know several other murderers, but I was closer to him than any of the others and knew him for a heck of a lot longer. On New Year's Eve 1999/2000, a very close friend of mine murdered someone for nothing. I'd say it was a robbery plot gone wrong, but what happened was the guy who got killed was telling my friend that he knew a place with money and drugs. When they got there, the guy got cold feet and confessed that he made the whole thing up. My friend told him to go kick in the door anyway or he would shoot him. When the guy refused, he killed him on the spot, emptied the whole gun in him. He dumped his car into a shallow boat dock in an attempt to get rid of it. I saw them pulling the car out of the water before I learned that my friend is the one that put it there. We were very close friends for a short time. We were a group of 4 guys that hung out and drank together, spent the night at each other's houses. He had started to do wilder and wilder things, that is armed robbery of fast food restaurants, and we started drifting apart. He was a couple of years younger than me. I was 19, he was 17, so he kind of looked up to me, but I was out of control myself. I was going to go to his house that evening, but I was with my new girlfriend at the time, and she didn't really want to hang out with him. So I didn't get to his house that night until 11:30ish. By then they said he had already taken off. I blamed myself for a while because I felt like if that guy had started talking about robbing the place, I could have told my friend to just ignore that shit and keep drinking or whatever. I know I wouldn't have gone with them because my girlfriend, now wife, would not have let me leave her to go run around with them. She was not a close friend at all, but rather someone I was acquainted with when I was in middle school and high school. For the purposes of this story, we will call her Ash. Ash was in a relationship with a guy named Addition. Ash's mother did not approve of such a relationship. Ash and Ed chose to be together regardless, and Ash apparently got into an argument with her mom one day. So, Ash and Ed devised a plan called KBM, which stood for Kill Beach Mom. Ash and Ed were texting back and forth one day and Ed coaxed her into killing her mom on that day. Ash waits for her mom to come home on that very day and shoots her at point blank range with a shotgun and then stabs her with a kitchen knife repeatedly. Then Ash apparently tossed around items to make it seem like this was a homicide from a burglary. Eventually later on her mom's body is discovered and the sheriff's office is called. When the deputies begin investigating, Ash confesses to the murder right then and there. Last I read, she pleaded guilty to her actions and was sentenced to 48 years in prison. She was a few months shy of 18 when she committed this crime. At some point in my criminal justice class we had a court bailiff from the county come in and talk about the case. She told me that Ash had that cold, dark look in her eyes when she was in the courtroom. The bailiff compared the look in her eyes to that of a shark. Ash wasn't sorry that she didn't the crime, she was upset that she was being held accountable. As for Ed, he was sentenced to 18 years in prison last I recall. I was friends with this one girl who just got charged with being an accomplice to murder. She was my friend in junior high because she was dating my cousin from a different school, and they basically made me a messenger who exchanged their love letters and whatnot. Anyway, my cousin was what you call a thug back in the days, average working adult now, and she was one of those bad girls who unfortunately couldn't get away from that life. My cousin did end up breaking up with her, but I still spoke to her in high school here and there. And during that time, her cousin, who I knew since elementary school, and her brother were arrested for murdering a man at a 7-Eleven. An innocent man, whose son watched him die because the guys wanted his faking wallet. The man died trying to protect his son, and he didn't even have that much money. So sad. But anyway, back to the girl. I just found out that this past March, she was arraigned as an accomplice for trying to murder her coworker. Apparently, she was working with two guys who were trying to rob the kid. He was only 14, and she was supposed to be the bait to let them in his home. Luckily, he survived after getting shot in the back, but she was caught and arraigned for attempted murder, which you can definitely read about on Google. Just look up "Dad murdered 7-Eleven" and attempted murder in Milpitas, California 2015. I guess murder runs in their family, but not mine. My cousin definitely dodged a bullet. No pun intended. Well, kinda. Yes, I'm my manager at my very first retail job. I was assistant manager, she was head boss. It was a small staff, we were very close. I worked with her for many years. After I moved away to another state, I got a call that she had been murdered. Not just murdered by some random crazy, but by her own husband. Thus threw me for a loop. They had the perfect relationship, always lovey, holding hands and kissing, and just the perfect couple. Well, in the year that I had moved, they were having problems. She was gonna divorce him. She went to their house with another female friend, a co-worker, to gather her some clothes and such. He was not at home, and was not supposed to be there. He showed up, walked in, grabbed the shotgun. The girls ran outside screaming for help. He started opening fire in the front yard. He shot the co-worker on his front lawn. My friend managed to get to the neighbor's house. They let her in, but her husband forced his way into their house, went to the back room where she was hiding, and shot her to death, then shot himself. This has messed with me to this day. I haven't made any sense of it at all. These are normal non-violent people. Never had a criminal record. Boyfriend this. He just snapped. The neighbors said he had a look in his eyes that it wasn't the man that they knew. The only person to survive the ordeal was the co-worker, although she was in critical condition for months. The person was my son's godfather, Michael, who killed his ex-wife, but the story needs context to understand just how bizarre this was. Michael came into my husband's life seeking medical services from my husband's father, a doctor that he paid for with lobsters he trapped, but also with tutoring he provided to the doctor's kids. Michael was a brilliant college student that became a brilliant physicist. Michael married the love of his life, Marilyn. She was wonderful, was involved in many civic works like a statewide anti-bullying campaign. Great couple. We asked them to be our son's godparents. On Passover, Michael gave out a different set of 4 questions to discuss, always challenging, always interesting. They were together 45 years. Then something happened. Michael had been ill, his wife had been caring for him. He was better enough that they were about to go out for another boat adventure. They had had many over the years. But Marilyn somehow broke her hip and never came home, left him, moved across the state to her sisters, got divorced. I always thought there was more to the broken hip story. Michael flipped out, sent out blast emails to everyone that Marilyn had lost her mind, that she had to come home. It was nice to know that at 69 you can meet a new guy, she had, and was about to be wed. Michael hunted them down and killed them, and tried to burn their boat. He had on him a gun, a knife, twist tie handcuffs, a dildo and Viagra. So what the hell was he planning? At his trial he claimed temporary insanity, but was found guilty. Then the day before sentencing, he threw himself off the 2nd floor of the jail to his death. They had 3 beautiful sons and 3 beautiful grandchildren. Why couldn't he just kill himself? I loved Marilyn. This happened probably back in the 60s or early 70s. My dad has several sisters, and at this time, was just a little boy, not sure his age, but probably around 10 or so, and one of his sisters is several years younger. Well, his older sister is driving, and I think she just got her license, or either not had them for too long. So if I'm remembering correctly, it's just my dad and little sister riding in the car, driven by his older sister. They are driving down the road getting very close to their house, like a mile away. Actually know the exact location here it happened, and there is this house at the top of the hill. Well, they have several kids outside playing, I think even riding bikes. Well, the older sister somehow ends up running over one of the little kids on the bike. The kid was I think around 5 years old. I'm not sure of the details, like if the kid just tried to cross the road, or if my aunt didn't see him in time, etc. Either way, it was definitely an accident, and both families agreed on it. My aunt was torn up, and my dad said she was sick to her stomach and throwing up for a day or two after the event. What really sucks is that this family lived there for a long time and they also rode the same school bus as my dad's family. I even lived down the road, growing up, and rode the same bus during school with the kids of the same family. I was in the same grade with one of the boys and we were pretty good friends growing up, but the whole time I never knew a thing. I only found this out just recently a year or two ago by a family friend who happened to mention it while passing by the spot. It is kind of like a family secret, but I believe the reason to that is just that there is no reason to mention it as it was a horrible tragedy. Michael was in my honors English class in high school. He was from a military family and spent a lot of time moving around as a kid, but we still got to be casual friends and even double dated a few times. After graduation, he was home on Christmas break and something snapped. Michael and his father were apparently screwing around with a baseball bat in the living room, and at some point either a heated argument ensued or an accident occurred. I've heard both versions of the story, but dad got his head taken almost clean off. When mom rushed in, Michael beat her to death right in the living room. Then in what can only be called a calculating, clinical move on the part of a mass murderer, he got in his parents' car and drove across town to pick up his little brother, stopping on the way back to get a gallon of gas in a can. He brought in the little brother, beat him to death with the same aluminum baseball bat, torched the house, and casually drove back to his university, where he was eventually arrested, tried, and put in prison for life. We are both the same age, 57, and I have a letter somewhere I got from him in prison about 6 weeks before he was sentenced. It was almost disturbingly calm, impeccable penmanship and the usual superb grammar and punctuation. I tried to contact him a couple of times in prison to see if he would allow me to be on the visitors list, and I know I was going to see him out of morbid curiosity, certainly not because we had some deep abiding friendship. There was a part of me that wanted to know what could have gone so horribly wrong for a person who was unfailingly gentle, kind, and quite charming during the brief year I got to know him. Prison officials told me that he refused to add anyone to his visitors list, and I respected that. He is in a maximum security prison in Ohio and is serving life without the possibility of parole. It really depresses me sometimes to think how my life could just as easily have been his, either through an outburst of anger or an incident that pushed me over the edge. Michael has been in prison for 38 years, and looking at his photo in the offender database just gives me chills. It is truly one of the great unsolved mysteries of my young adulthood why something like this ever happened. So tragic, so completely and utterly evil. About a year after high school, this kid who I had known since we were little beat his grandmother to death with a baseball bat. Then, one day about a year and a half after the murder, I'm sitting in books a million, bam, minding my own business reading, when suddenly I hear someone say, "Hey you, what have you been up to?" I turned around, and it's Dude. Just standing there at my coffee shop, like he hadn't just murdered someone a year ago. Seriously, I think I could have turned around and seen the ghost of his dead grandma and be less shocked than I was seeing him standing there. And I don't know, maybe it's just me and my way of thinking, but over the years I had come to believe that if you hardcore murder someone, typically you go to jail for hardcore murdering someone. You do not, however, go to the coffee shop. Well, that's about the time my brain said, "Fuck this shit, kid, you're on your own." I got nothing. So I sat there, just staring up at him, praying my deadbeat brain could come up with something that could make any of this make sense. And I mean seriously, we have known each other since we were little. So I mean he had to know, when he walked up to me to say hi, that there was absolutely no way this was gonna be one of those "oh hey I saw a kid I went to 4th grade with," and we both nodded in remembrance of each other when we passed by. Oh no, he knew I knew, and he knew my head would explode if I didn't walk away from there with some sort of explanation. In reality though, at that point he could have said anything, and I would have believed it. He could have told me that he was his own long lost identical twin cousin, but for whatever reason he saw me and thought, hey, now there's an extremely awkward and uncomfortable conversation I would like to have, or maybe he did it just to fuck with me, who knows. Either way, after what felt like an eternity my brain mustered up a reply. Oh wow, hey man, wow, long time no see, so where you living at these days? I mean did he just now escape jail and stop for a hot chocolate along the way? I faking needed to know how this was possible. And then he super casually says, yeah I'm working and staying over at Western right now. FYI the Western he was referring to is Western State Hospital, where he was in fact working and living there as a patient. Dude used to be that typical super chill hippie from high school. We all heard he had taken a shit ton of acid, or LSD or some shit, and so he decided to beat his grandma, who raised him, to death. He then proceeded to shave off all the hair on his body, and was found walking the Blue Ridge Parkway bald and naked. But a psychiatrist testified he was schizophrenic, and he ended up being found not guilty by reason of insanity. So they sent him to live at Western State Hospital, where they not only gave him a job, but he had day passes, where they would take the patients out to do things, like giving me a heart attack at the Books A Million. So as I was sitting at Books A Millions trying to trick the world into thinking I was the proud drinker of a coffee, and not a hot cocoa, Western State was dropping off a van full of murderers with not so much as a name tag or a shirt that says if escaped, please return to Western State. But here's the best part of the story, get this sheet. So he's found not guilty by reason of insanity, which means he's way too insane to be sent to jail. So they decided to send him to a mental institution, where they thought he was sane enough to work there, and sane enough to be dropped off amidst the general non-murdering population. And also, he was apparently sane enough 6 years after murdering his grandma, that he no longer even needed to live there. And not only did they let him go free, they hooked him up with his own apartment, and they decided to reduce his drug tests and therapy visits. TLDR hippie beat grandma to death, ran into him after the murder,